Hi, hello. And did you know I have an idea inside my mind that needs to be shared with others? It has not, in a direct sense, have to do with anything with the previous video about revolution. It has much more to do with philosophy and logic that you can find on your own. I had this question to myself. I had some peace of mind and time to think, and I have ask myself whether there is, like the question is, whether there is anything in the world that is an idea that is prior to experience. So you take any concept, any object, an idea of an object, and you think whether there is a possibility that it could exist as an idea before there is a human mind to come up with it. And so you take number one, and this answers half of the question whether mathematics is invented or discovered by humans. You take number one as a concept. Number one describes anything as a separate thing in the world, like one finger. One as a number describes separateness in the world. And you think, well, I perceive things as separate because I am a separate entity. I am one thing. I perceive myself to end at the outbounds of my body. If you think in more depth of yourself, then you think I end where my actions end, where the influence of my entity as a human being ends. So I move a cup and there is this influence to the world, and then you understand that on a more kind of a level, you end nowhere, and the whole world is an intricate interplay of everything growing and changing and being, going with the flow. I think on every level, as said in the previous video, there is the flow and the dynamics to the world. There is the path of least resistance being played at every level, like the atoms doing their thing, chemical things doing their thing, the psyche, the body of a human doing its thing, the psyche doing its thing. It's as if there is nothing happening in the first place. Then I ask myself this question, and then it kind of like the thought continues. And so whether there's any idea that exists prior to there being a human experience, and then you take other concepts or ideas and you ask yourself whether kindness exists, and people who are like into idealism or Plato's philosophy regard it as an sort of an ideal that exists beyond the human experience. With Plato, I was having my own troubles thinking that I do want to believe it, but like the idea of there being a perfect circle, your brain just makes, as AI does, have this attributes of a concept that it perceives in every depiction of this concept, and every drawn circle it sees like what's the connection, and it makes this ideal. So it not really does there have to be another type of plane of existence. It's an idea of wholeness, which comes back in a very direct way to the whole thing that I was saying before. The idea of wholeness idea of one whole thing as everything that there is. So it's the whole totality of everything that exists. It is not yet divided. It's just, imagine this one whole thing. Imagine if this is all that there is, this thing does not exist, and you try to zoom into here. So the outbounds do not exist. You cannot describe it with anything. There is no contrast that it is defined by. So you zoom into this part, and it appears as nothing because it is all that there is. You have a feeling that it exists, but it cannot. It's just like it's this neutrality and emptiness. So that's, in my opinion, how logically there can arise everything from nothing, as it is the same thing. You're very welcome to debate with me. So the whole thing has no contrast. It is one whole thing and barely exists. And then you can do set theory and basic logical exercises with it. Once again, the whole thing cannot be described. It has no value. It has no meaning. Why does it exist? It exists because nothing cannot exist. Nothing is not a thing. Nothing in its own way. If you need a proof, I have developed this kind of a sense for logical statements that can be found on their own without, like, with proofs that you can do on your own. And there is a feeling for those statements of logic. They feel like magic in your head. So to prove that there is nothing, that there is not nothing, that nothing does not exist. Imagine there is logically, in a kind of a set theory sense, there is an everything. So this everything must contain everything. Otherwise, it's not everything. It must contain nothing as well as a concept. If it contains nothing, then it does not exist, because nothing exists then. And there is a paradox that arises, and then you understand that nothing is always included, as it is in set theory when you're learning about things being included in other things in logic or computer science. There is this nothing that is always present in all things because it does not exist, basically. It has no value on its own. If it had any value, it would not be nothing. It does not make everything obsolete or non-existent. It is just it itself does not exist. Then you can philosophically ask yourself about the state of death being not experienceable. So those statements, they're kind of a logos statement for me. They're this highest kind of logic that you can do on your own that is very magical. And so when there is this everything that exists because nothing cannot exist, so there is almost nothing, undescribable everything, it can divide itself into, like, on a very funny logical principle, it can divide itself into two parts. Why two? And how would it think? Two, because it is still equal to one, not in a sense of, like, you can have three parts and they are like together making one thing, but you take two things, and because they are two, they are described as like yin and yang, and they are described as that which is not the other. So you have 80%, you have 20%, you have half of a whole thing. They are described as that which is not the other, but at the same time, when you take one thing, so you take 80%, you know the value of the other thing. So they are also describing at the same time the value of the other thing. You are directly finding it. So kind of, they're not the other thing, but they are at the same time the other thing, because it's a very direct relationship with no magic or no place for chaos. And then we come to the third thing, which then you kind of have math that arises on its own through logic, through the logic of non-duality. I really like this train of thought and composing set theory and logic on my own. Then the chaos comes into play for a sort of a relation between parts that is no longer predictable. You are no longer understanding which part is the other part. So triple pendulum in physics and math of three things. Triple pendulum becomes chaotic. Its behavior is no longer describable with our tools. Three-body problem not being chaotic and not describable behavior in terms of math. I wrote a book, if anyone ever is interested in those things. A little book, a little fictional book, and there is a part that says, if you ever die and your mind goes to blank, go to 3 parts and start a jam. Energy arises with 2 poles existing, and they're in this flow. One whole thing has nothing about it. It's a state of pure neutrality. The most important thing, which I will probably make another whole video about, is that your mind has all the power. Whether you believe in mind over matter or matter over mind, which I believe if we live in everything, then everything is everything. It's not one thing or the other. It's mind over matter creating matter over mind and backwards. So it is your brain being inside your mind. It's one whole mind having the dream of having a brain, which creates the debate and stuff like this. And no one, in the end, when we all find out more, maybe, I don't think there is a final understanding. I think the final understanding is that everything can exist simultaneously as ideas and physicality. So no one is right or wrong, and nothing was. I do think there is some like kindness makes sense. Love and acceptance for things make more sense logically than fear, because fear divides more. And it's like, what is the thing afraid of? Other than on some level it's consensual non-consent of the universe playing with itself and being surprised, and hopefully everything is for funsies and kindness. There is this quote that says, if you do things right, no one will notice that you have done a thing, because it just falls into place of this whole puzzle. It's when you have everything for the puzzle, the last thing will arise on its own. And I hope that some of it or all of it was transferable to your mind and understandable. Peace and be well.